All right, welcome back to Off the Crypto Cuff. We're your hosts, Jeff and Jesse. Two friends here, just having a drink. We talk about crypto mostly. We talk about current events, politics, whatever comes on our way. Basically, the idea is we have a drink while we discuss, and once the drink's over, that's the conversation is over at the same time. So, cheers.
Yep. Cheers, my friend.
Cheers. I'm drinking a little Whistle Pig Old Fashioned, the 10-year. Yep.
Ooh, nice.
So it's pretty good. It's a little rye.
The Angel's Envy.
Oh yeah,
Old-fashioned.
Very nice. Yeah. So yeah, we apologize. There's been a lot of sickness this year, so we've been on the struggle bus. I think we're both healthy now, and hopefully no more interruptions. But so yeah, I'm glad you're feeling better. I've been good now too. I felt like I was sick all summer or winter. I'm sorry. Hopefully not all summer. But
yeah, hopefully not.
Man, it's been crazy this winter for sure. But finally some warm weather, and now we're hopefully on a mend in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So yeah, if you want, I can kick it off with what I was kind of going to bring up. Like I said, we were kind of talking before we got started here, was basically XRP. I'm a big XRP fan. I like other stuff too, but it is one of my I think bigger holdings, but also to me has one of the most abilities to potentially be something big, especially because we see a lot of it in the news right now and stuff, and just people are talking about it. But anyway, I think we spoke about this last time. Garlinghouse came on social medias and basically said, hey, SEC is going to be dropping their charges. The lawsuit's over. We can move on. But we've all kind of been waiting to see when the SEC is going to actually drop it. Now, I guess apparently it's kind of, yes, they have dropped it, but they haven't officially released anything saying whether it was dropped. So a lot of people were kind of getting upset because it's, they expected to see some price action happening with it when when this lawsuit dropped. But I think personally, just based on what I'm seeing, is it's most likely it's just because SEC has not released anything, so we haven't seen any pops because of that. There's some speculation, when Paul Atkins takes over, that's maybe when they're going to release something, when he's sworn in for the or confirmed for the new SEC chair. So once what's his name's out of there. So
yeah. I agree. It's like when Atkins gets in, it's just not going to be good for XRP. It's going to be good for crypto across the board because there's a lot of actions that are in line, because it's like the SEC went after, Ripple because of XRP and the way the initial release happened. But there's a lot of other things that they actually tried to classify as securities, but they didn't go after those tokens directly or the foundations or the companies backing them. They went after exchanges and saying you're listing and gave a list these securities on your site, and they sued Kraken, Coinbase, and a bunch of others. And there's coins that we care about that was on that list. So we're just waiting for all of that to get cleared up. So there's a lot kind of at play here.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about clarity. That's kind of what it helps with, and it's just until the government's kind of backing it more, we're not going to really see anything too crazy, I think, but we'll see. Just time will tell. Just gotta have patience. So don't get frustrated. That's what I say. It's really easy to get frustrated, and honestly, I think if you get too far down the rabbit hole of just researching and trying to guess when something's going to happen, it just kind of I've found for me it deters me a little bit and kind of makes me feel like, man, is anything ever going to happen? But the more I've kind of stepped back and said, okay, let's just patience. I've done better. So it's.
Yeah, there's a lot of market sentiment just watching X. There's a lot of people that are exhausted. There's people posting heat maps of the stock market. It'd be like, I'm finally tired of winning. And I'm sitting here kind of like, putting my palm to my forehead and be like, especially people that are frustrated in the US over Trump and what he's trying to do. And we've discussed this. There's going to be short-term pain, and we're experiencing the short-term pain.
Yeah.
The question is does the long-term payoff happen? So this is the short-term, and this is what it looks like. And we were already heading for complete market failure. If the election went the other way, what potentially would have happened was the Federal Reserve would be completely on board, drop interest rates, pump a bunch of money into the market. You would actually see the market go green across the board. And ultimately, that is the inflation of the dollar, or the debasement of it makes it valued less. But of course, everybody now feels wealthier in the short term. And then you have this short-term euphoria and then more long-term pain. And eventually you can only do that so many times until you're actually forced into hyperinflation and then death of the dollar. In a way, this is trying to rescue the dollar and trying to make it the strongest currency in the world. Mm-hmm. And this is the short-term pain to basically detox the US off of these, short-term highs, because we've been on these, bubble cycles for a long time,
Yeah, I mean, COVID was a perfect example. It's literally everybody's like, man, we got all this money. This is great. People spending money right and left. What happened right after COVID here? What's happening right now? It's literally, we've all seen it happen in the last 5 years. And that's exactly. So yeah, I agree. It's short-term pain for hopefully long-term betterness.
Right. And and the thing is, though, is that it's kind of working. Is that a lot of people are like, he's starting a trade war. It's like the trade war has been going on for a long time. Is that all these countries have extraordinary tariffs on U.S. goods. So basically, that means that for any goods in the U.S. to go anywhere is a hurdle and a half. And if it does, it's beyond expensive when it gets where it's going. So really exporting goods outside of the U.S. is extremely expensive. That's why so many businesses moved out of the U.S. because it's cheaper to build out outside the U.S. Cheaper energy, cheaper labor, and it's cheaper to import it into here.
I didn't know we were going to go here already. All right. Right. So I get wound up on this because I think a lot of people just don't understand tariffs and what's happening.
Right.
Not only that, it's like, what's happening because he's saying, I'm going to put tariffs on there. What's happening?
They're basically backing off. They're finally saying it's like
their tariffs. Yes. Exactly. Saying, okay, well, maybe we'll drop our tariffs, because I think a lot of people don't realize a lot of it's just a threat. I think. I mean,
the thing is, though, it's a threat with teeth, because the thing is, we are the world's largest economy. We still are, fortunately, which means that we have the bargaining power, and he's trying to use that bargaining power while we still have it to the best of his ability. And one of the things, and I've harped on this once before, and I'm going to say it again because it still bothers me. Tariffs does not bring inflation.
Right.
Inflation is the increasing of the monetary supply, which causes the devaluation of the monetary system, which causes price increases. Price increases is the effect. Yep. Price increases has multiple types of causes: supply and demand, inflation, tariffs. Just because you see a price of a good going up doesn't mean inflation.
Right.
I was like, I kind of getting it. It's like the number of times I hear people say, "Oh my God, the tariffs, inflation." I'm like, "Oh my God, please."
Yeah. Well, it's. I get it that people worry that if we put tariffs on things, we're gonna have to make up the price. From understand in certain things, it's gonna really affect us, like vehicles and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think ultimately it could the idea is to make it so it could be cheaper. It's just going to take time because we're going to have to bring things back, like you said, back to the US, start building things back here, becoming less reliant on other countries. and manufacturing happening overseas,
Mm-hmm.
and bring it back within our borders, you know, it, and that's part of, I think that's also part of the plan, is that he's trying to make it where it makes it for those companies better for them to come back here. He'll probably give them tax breaks. It's, he started doing that in the first term,
Mm-hmm.
but then it all got flipped around when Biden took over. But it's if they're willing to drop their tariffs, it makes it's kind of just even in the playing field. Also, I think, so if he's forcing them to drop their tariffs, it's like, why do we have to pay, but they don't have to pay, and that's kind of unfair to me. Like, it just feels like we're being taken advantage of. And I think that's just what he's trying to do, is just bring it
Mm-hmm.
back to this country, bring things back into this country. That's not only just manufacturing happening outside this country, that's money leaving this country. I think a lot of people don't realize that too. You're building economies of other countries by what we're buying that we could be building here, and building our own economy internally to us. And I don't think a lot of people see that either. They just worry about the prices of things,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
which
it's
will
like,
balance out. Eventually, it'll all balance out. Like, that's just it.
and that kind of circles back to is that this is effectively the short term pain for the long term benefit. You have to have, you know, some farsightedness,
Yeah.
in this, and saying, okay, it's like, what is this going to look like when things resolve out? And when, we still, and we're not getting taken advantage of by these, tariffs that we didn't, because the tariffs that Europe has against American goods don't necessarily affect everyday Americans, except for when we lose a job. But most people actually don't see it. And the person that's potentially losing the job doesn't necessarily understand why,
Right.
unless they're actually keyed into exactly what's going on. It's like, because I do actually remember, oh my God, what was this, like 3 decades ago?
Yeah.
But my older brother worked for a company. Now, this had been about 2 decades ago, but it's been a while. And he was working for a company, and he got laid off, and he was actually told exactly why. And they were moving, it was manufacturing, and these are large diesel engines, for a particular, company. And they were moving that capability to Mexico.
Hmm.
And that's why he got laid off.
Cheaper labor.
Yep.
Yeah, and it costs them nothing to bring it in.
Yep.
And not only that, they can bring it on the railroad. They can bring it on trucks. They don't have to fly it. No boats. It's cheaper.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the thing is that probably exporting it from the U.S. cost them more.
Yep.
And if they were to export it, say, from Mexico to Europe, it probably actually also was a discount.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah. So as it's like, American labor has been expensive around the world for a long time for that very reason. And I'm sure that it's like, if people really dig into it, they'll actually see similar stories.
Yeah. Everybody just takes it for a superficial thing that the news tells them, basically. It's how do you feel about all these the government layoffs
More,
that's
please.
happening? Yeah, I mean, I was talking to somebody today, and he made a really good point. I didn't really think about it, but he's like, this is the same thing they've done to the military. It's just now happening in the government. When the military, they start, cutting military down, and they start, kicking people out, finding reasons to kick them out, or give them early retirement, or things like that. This is exactly the same thing. They're just now doing it with the government. The government's has gotten employees of. I mean, don't get me wrong. I feel bad for people losing their jobs, 100%. But as a contractor, we've it's we do that. We deal with that all the time. Like, it's not, we don't have any kind of guaranteed jobs. It's just you have a job, and when you don't have a job, you go find another job. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's not that there's no jobs out there. It's just there's maybe not the jobs that you might be doing where you're kind of have an easy life, apparently. But so
Yeah, it's like
yeah.
I understand. It's like, again, short term pain, and
Yeah.
and this pain is felt by the people that got laid off. But there is somebody that, kind of made the point, especially if you were trying to make this kind of like a partisan thing,
Mm-hmm.
is that when the Biden administration was laying people off for actually not getting the vaccination and they were government employees, that side cheered for it.
Right.
So now suddenly getting laid off being a government employee because your job's no longer needed is a bad thing.
Yeah. Or forcing people out of the military. Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
know.
Oh, there
I,
was a lot of
yeah.
people that got forced out of the military just because they
Yep.
didn't want to get the jab.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's just funny. It's, I don't know. Again, you're not. I mean, you're not going to please everybody in the world. It's or in the country.
Right.
It's not. It's just how in. I guess the world, because he does influence around the world. But
Well,
and don't get me wrong, I don't like everything he's doing. Like, there's a lot of things I don't like, but it's also like, you know, I'm sure a lot of guys don't like everything their wife does, but they still love her.
yeah. Well, I mean,
So,
his responsibility is to the U.S. Outside of that, I don't care.
exactly. Yeah.
You know. Um,
But yeah, I'm just, I again, I'm on board with everything. If it, I see the big picture and the long term goals,
mm-hmm.
and I see where we're headed. Whereas before, I saw where we were headed, and it was scary, and we didn't know what was going to happen.
I mean, it's like, yeah, I've described it as that, that train heading over a cliff. I've done that analogy a few times.
Yeah,
I don't think I need to beat it again, but I mean, that's the way it actually definitely felt because I saw the direction of the economy and it seemed definitely on effectively a destined crash that's going to be beyond epic that, that history would actually be telling tales about because, it's like there's been a lot of economies that got inflated to death, starting with the fall of Rome, Weimar Germany, Argentina. I mean, there's been several instances of this, but you're talking about a nation that's actually got the world reserve currency heading towards this cataclysm. I mean, that's going to have ripple effects, especially if it doesn't get under control.
yeah,
You know, so I mean, there's some people that talk about like the what's called the fourth turning, and China's potential rise of actually becoming, the next world power, to supplant the U.S. I don't know if that's actually really going to happen, but I mean, typically there are patterns to things, and history does dictate that. Even the best formed governments have a particular lifespan. Almost everything has a lifespan, and entropy is a thing.
yeah.
So, have we actually run the course of the United States? Which I hope to God we haven't, because
Yeah.
we are the last bastion of freedom.
Right.
Or is this a good course direction to basically fix us to where we can actually stave off that, inevitable historical death?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it'd be difficult to have I mean, China's a communist party, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think it'd be hard to have that be a world power, but the they certainly have the numbers in many different ways. So, and some power.
They do. I mean, is this like it's not just economics. It's also culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if you take a look at sci-fi, it was like it's like I kind of like sci-fi because they try to predict the future a little bit. And there's been several, and I'm going to kind of like pick up Firefly, one of my favorite TV shows ever. And one of the things that they actually decided to do, because it was like the space, Western opera. It's kind of like a weird conglomeration of
Mm-hmm.
like themes, but it actually did work. But the way they actually imagined it is that there was actually kind of like a merger between Chinese and / American culture, to where the primary language was still English, but since it was a made-for-TV show on Fox, all their cursing was actually Chinese. So there was
Oh,
actually this blend of cultures, throughout. And the way people dressed was kind of like a blend between Western culture and Chinese culture. So I mean, that's the way they actually presented the future of how things kind of sort of work themselves out.
yeah. I see what you're
And so
saying.
it's kind of interesting to see how other people would actually picture it.
Yeah, like it's portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I gotcha. Interesting. Yeah, that's like I think it was like what was the one where the guy was in the time machine and he ended up going way into the future, like,
Are
and
you
it
talking
was
about just the time machine?
maybe it was called just the time machine. I can't remember, but it was
Yeah.
like it was in the like in the 1930s or something where it started, and then it was
Hmm.
like his girlfriend died, and he made the time machine so he'd go back and save her potentially, but everything he did, it seems like it didn't matter. She still died. But then, so then he just went forward, but then he went way forward, and there was the people who lived in like the cliffs and stuff,
Hmm.
and they were all like they were just sort of like like no, there wasn't. It was just one race. It wasn't
Hmm.
multiple races. But then there was the really smart people who that lived in the ground with the weird ape sort of type of animals, but
Hmm.
controlled them. But I don't know, just interesting. I guess like I could see something like that. That the people in the trees, that being the new like one race type situation versus having the different races and things. But
Yeah.
anyways, just a different way of portraying it, like the people, like you said.
Hmm.
Anyways, what you had something else you want to talk about? You can
Well,
pivot.
yeah, I mean, just spitballing some ideas. So, because
Yeah.
you and I have probably both heard from a lot of different YouTubers, influencers. It's like, and even on XA, this comes up again. The big price prediction. The XRP is going to go to $10,000, or it's worthless.
Yeah.
I was like, we've both heard it.
Right.
And I was actually thinking about this, especially with my own experiments that I've been doing on chain with other layer ones, is what is the actual value of a layer one? And we could even take a look at Bitcoin for this and what, gives it ultimately value. And, when I say that, when I'm talking about the layer one, you have the chain and its native token.
Hmm.
So for the XRP ledger, the native token's XRP. Well, when ISO 222 comes completely online at the near the end of this year, that's the deadline's the end of this year. So November is when it's supposed to be online. So
Okay.
Swift is trying to get all of its ducks in a row to where it's completely upgraded. They're integrated in with Chainlink. They've run tests, with HBAR, Algorand. They've been running tests across the board, trying to elevate their own speed. I did do actually a headline search, and one of the headlines was actually kind of interesting. Is the Swiss central bank rejects Bitcoin reserves. That's kind of important because that actually got me to take a look at what the Swiss central bank is considering going in the future, considering where the future is going. And as far as any documentation that can be found, Swift is held fast actually to avoid any crypto or crypto integrations because of the volatility. So they're going
Hmm.
to stay Swift based. So that kind of means that Swift is not going away.
Yeah.
And then we go back to take a look at XRP and why I question its valuation, even though I would love $10,000 a token. I mean, who
Hmm.
wouldn't? Especially at these prices. I mean, that means that it's
Right.
effectively a steal.
Right.
Um, but it effectively is to say XRP is a fraction of an XRP, because it's low cost transactions, is the price you pay for transmitting value. So, what's the value being sent? Well, if you're talking about central banks and their um, adversity to volatility, they're going to effectively use a well-known asset, which is going to be real USD, which is XRPs or Ripple's native US dollar backed token, or some other like stablecoin.
Hmm.
So think USDC, USDT. So that effectively means that any chain this can actually also apply to. So when we start looking into the future of enterprise or bank integration, these institutional integrations, from that aspect of what they're actually going to be dealing in. So then what does give the chain value? Well, what gives it the chain value is its activity,
Right.
right? How many transactions are getting moved? So over time, yeah, there's going to be accumulation of these tokens, but that effectively just affects the supply and the distribution of the supply. And if you have a very inexpensive chain like XRP, then those tokens are getting bought up today.
Mm-hmm.
And those and what they're actually buying supply wise could actually last them decades.
Right.
Especially if there's a lot of tokens. So that means that there's going to be very little buying by these institutions in the future for their future needs because they're already buying and they're already holding right now.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And
you're saying the institutions right now are buying. That's what you're
across the board, of course,
yeah.
For whatever
but they're buying XRP because you need XRP in order to do the transactions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw a guy. I don't remember, and I think there's a couple guys that are talking about it. Basically saying like, I think he was saying the same thing. Basically, institutions are buying. If you're somebody who's holding, he had numbers broke out, and basically like 30 to 100,000, you're like 1 or 2% of the people that hold XRP in that amount. Because eventually, like I said, it's the institutions are buying it. They're gonna buy. It's not going to be available. Like there's not going to be any more out there. The only way you're buying is if somebody's selling, essentially, right? Now I know XRP does have about. I want to say it was, last I remember, it was just under 50% of the available tokens are locked into a wallet that they release every year. Some of it, from what I understand.
Their escrow.
Yeah, it's like their escrow. So obviously that's going to take some time for there not to be any available unless somebody's selling it because of that escrow. But eventually, in years, I'm not sure what the release plan is for it, but I'm sure eventually it can run out. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what I don't know what to believe, honestly. Like it's kind of this all makes sense. It all but okay, well, what's the projected price of this, and how are people saying $10,000?
Right.
When is that $10,000? Is that 20 years from now? Is that 50 years from now? What's that?
Well, and I was kind of thinking of an example, and this is kind of like perfect, right? Is this like no man for a price to hold, right? It's like I could hold up this pencil, and you can and we can both agree on a price, right? And you say it's like, okay, 10 cents, right? It's a pencil,
right?
But if I say it's like, for me, this pencil's worth to me $1 million, would you buy it for $1 million?
Yeah. No.
Exactly. Right. So I could list this, like any token, I could put it up on exchange, and I could actually say, is my willing sell price for, this token is $1 million. I could put that up on exchange, and it'll probably be there for decades and never sell.
Right.
Because to actually sell on the other side has to be a willing buyer. And then it has the value that I specified. But until there's a buyer willing to let go of their money, it doesn't have that value.
Right.
And that's the way these markets effectively work. And then when you actually see price action, is just like, and then you get into like, weak hands, people trying to, downplay. Yes, there's always two people on either side of any transaction. You have the willing buyers at a given price, and then the willing sellers. And a lot of times the sellers are desperate, or they need cash for one reason or another, or they panic sell, without actually really thinking it through. It's like, oh my God, the market's going red, I need to sell. It's like, no, you only need to sell if you actually need to sell. In other words, you have a need that trumps you holding the asset.
Right.
Whether that's taxes, paying bills, in other words, you put too much into this, you're cash dry, you need cash. So therefore you have a need to sell. So that way you have cash so you can take care of your needs.
Right.
Other than that, I mean, there shouldn't be any reason why people sell into a market, but a lot of people do just out of panic.
Right. Panic selling and then FOMO buying. But yeah, it's like you said, when price goes up, when people are selling and buying, because it drives it up. But
Well, I mean, and there's also that balance, right? It's just like when you actually have more willing buyers, the buyers themselves will start outbidding each other, and that's what and that's the process that causes the price to go up, is that bidding process to try to get in. You
Mhm.
know, and I played around with this a little bit. It was like when I was done doing trading. Oh, jeez, 5 6 years ago now.
Mhm.
So it was basically the previous cycle. It was like when I got started with you. So got into Coinbase. It was basically just pure market buys. But then I got a Binance account, and then I started actually doing market buys, and kind of started getting familiar with actually doing market bidding and all that stuff. And that's where you're actually seeing, how the price action happens. Because when you actually go on and you just buy something, on simply just on Coinbase or some of these other simpler exchanges, you're just paying market rate or whatever the market sentiment is in that fraction of time, and you're not actually seeing the how the price is being derived in the open market.
Right. Yeah, I mean, same with the stock market, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not sure how you doing there with the drink? Oh. Hmm.
Uh,
So, was there anything
so
else you wanted to bring up, or did you? I thought you had one more thing you mentioned beforehand.
there was that. Um,
I mean, we can briefly talk about the broker rule that they're killing. I think we've talked about it for a second before. It's made both through the House and the Senate, and it's on the desk of the president now to sign. So sounds like they should be killing that. If you basically if you're uh, what they say, if you're trading, you're a broker, you're going to be taxed on your trades or something. I don't know. It was somewhere along
uh,
those lines. I don't remember
give me
exactly,
1 second. Let's see
but yeah,
here. The broker rule for DeFi refers to regulation introduced by the U.S. IRS that aim to classify certain DeFi participants as brokers
yeah,
under
that's
U.S.
what it
tax
was.
law.
Yeah, so they would get
Yep.
taxed. Yeah. Which that was one of those Biden things.
Yep. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's just like there was a lot of um, Operation Chokepoint 1.0, Operation Chokepoint 2.0 to try to hamper and slow down and stop basically this
Yeah.
market, and that was basically one of the policies.
Well, that was one of the things I think a lot of people talked about too. Was like they're doing these things to slow down the market so they could
Mm.
catch up to it to start try to figure out how to regulate it. But so instead of letting the market go and figuring things out, they do things like that to try to push it down so they can have more time to figure things out.
Well, that is a very altruistic way of actually thinking about it. I mean, it's like, well, I was just like, the other half of it is just like maybe I'm more pessimistic, but
Yeah.
it's just competition to the dollar. It's competition to the existing system.
Yeah, I
So
can agree with that. Yeah. So they were potentially it's maybe it was kind of like they could it would either squash it or slow it down. It's going
right,
to help in one way or another. It's going to do what they have a result if they want what they
yeah.
want. So
It's like at a certain point, is just like the second the first block got minted with Bitcoin, I think a genie was out of the bottle at that point. There was no stopping
yeah,
it.
yeah. I
I
think
mean,
it's too big to stop now. Yeah, it's being impossible to stop it now. It's
yeah. I mean, it's just like it's like I mean, it's not necessarily easy to do this day and age,
Mhm.
but or it's actually not really as beneficial as it was in the past. I mean, because getting access to music is extraordinarily easy. But think about Napster back in the '90s.
Yeah,
And that was nearly impossible to stop any like file sharing type, service, especially with like peer to peer. It's just like, and that's what effectively is, running these, blockchains. But it's these exchanging of in a ledger in a distributed manner, instead of illicit files in a in a distributed manner.
right.
So it's definitely democratized, how potentially financial systems can run and operate. There was actually a couple of pieces of news that was kind of interesting technology wise. So one of the things I talked about with you a while ago, and I used to hold Casper. I don't hold any Casper anymore. But one of the things that they were actually trying to get into was is like these hybrid blockchains. So you'd have public-private blockchains, or basically a hybrid solution to where your data basically stays in within your private network, but ultimately it's hashed and secured by the public network. So it kind of gives you best of both worlds,
Best both worlds, yeah.
right? So there was actually an article recently that um, Hedera is actually trying to implement um, basically this type of aggregated networks to where you can actually support a private blockchain or a hybrid blockchain on Hedera. And what I kind of found funny was, and I actually had to look this up, is Algorand already supports this.
Oh, your pride and joy.
I wouldn't say my pride and joy, but yes, I am slowly turning into a maxi when it comes to Algorand. I'm sorry. Well, it's just like it's easy to use. It's like the price action. Yes, it sucks, and that's why I'm actually trying to formulate my ideas around what actually gives a blockchain value, so I can actually have a realistic view from a frame of reference.
Right.
And I'm involved in DeFi. I'm running a node. I wouldn't mind actually running a Hedera node, but there's no real instructions on it, and it looks like it's permissioned at the moment. So it's not really permissionless or decentralized. Starting up an Algorand node was extraordinarily easy to do.
Yeah.
I made it more complicated for myself because I'm running it in a Kubernetes cluster. Most everybody else is just running it on a single node, but it's not that hard to get into. So it's just like they're definitely hitting these easy buttons. And when you're actually talking about mass adoption, it's removing as much friction for a potential end user as possible.
Yeah, we've talked about this. Yep.
Exactly.
Easy button. Yep.
And there's
I agree with you. I'm not
a lot of change doing that.
Yeah, I'm not against Algorand. I just I think it could have a day for sure. Yeah. It's
a day.
It's not a lot. No, have its day. Like it
right.
could come, come out of the be something. It definitely has the potential. It's like,
I would, it definitely has its potential. And the biggest issue, and the one thing I keep saying on X, and I can wholeheartedly believe this, is that the market is still driven by speculation.
Yeah,
it is not driven by utility. The people that come into the market with a bunch of their dumb money, they're not looking at utility. They're looking at what could be the next pump.
Right.
That's all they're looking at.
I do hear the word utility used a lot more than it used to be.
Yes,
for sure. Right. So I think we are in that transition of potentially heading in that direction. A pivotal point, I guess you could say.
It's one of those things where it's potentially going to be like it's slow and then it's going to smack you across the face.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And basically it's going to be one of those blink and you miss it type moments. It's like I've been investing in utility for a long time and waiting a long time because I'm invested in utilities. For the most part, I have not changed, Chase Beam coins, because those things can flutter. They could just trade sideways indefinitely. You don't know when they're going to pop, and there's really not much you can do with meme coin besides hold. As I said, my strategy has kind of morphed into just not just buying into something that I believe in, because, I think it's like, if you truly believe in a layer one, token, whether it's Ethereum or otherwise, you would actually get more involved in the ecosystem. So even if you don't necessarily say you're not a fan of a lot of the projects that are on Ethereum, but you actually like Ethereum, well, then take a little bit of the Ethereum and then stake it. Take a little bit of the Ethereum and marry it with some Tether and put it onto an exchange as a liquidity pool. Then you'll actually start earning passively in two different scenarios on Ethereum. And you're actually helping the chain's health by doing it.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just being speculative by buying it and holding it.
Right.
That's all that is. So that's what I'm
That's
trying to
true.
do.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I'm trying to eat that dog food. It'd be like, I believe in Algorand, so I'm actually trying to actually help the health of the chain by
Right.
providing DeFi, by providing a node. And then once I get all of my Algorand stuff to where I find that it's most beneficial to me, then I'm going to move to Hedera. And then once I get Hedera there, then I'll move to ADA and figure those out. But it's like I've already got so much time and mental space to figure stuff out, and I'm still trying to get this one honed in.
So running it, okay. So I'm gonna nerd out here a little bit on it with it. So you're running it in Kubernetes, you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are you able to stand up more than one node?
There's no benefit to doing that.
No. Okay. I was, kind of like you have multiple miners. That's kind of that's where I was going with that. That's what I
Right.
thought. I was like, I wasn't sure if it was like if you had stood up multiple nodes, because Kubernetes essentially is like sort of like VMware. Essentially, you can have multiple nodes built inside of it. I didn't know if that made sense or not. But
The reason why I'm doing it this way is for runtime. So
yeah.
basically, I've got a clustered storage at the back end, and I do have a high speed network backbone.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that if I'm rebooting a node and the pod or the actual Algorand node actually has a transition between hosts,
Right.
it can reattach to its storage, and the downtime is so minimal, I actually don't get penalized as a node runner for downtime.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, that's one of the magics of Kubernetes.
I mean, it is.
Yeah.
It's just like because if you actually take a look at the specs of what's required, is somebody's running an Algorand node on the Steam Deck. It doesn't take a lot of compute to run one. It's very efficient in the way it is. If you want to actually to earn passive income, it's a minimum 30,000 algo, associated to the wallet that's associated with the node. And that's the minimum. That would earn you probably about what is it? 0.8 or 0.9 blocks per day. So you're less than one block a day.
And that's not costing you. It's just what's locked up, right? That's
well, the thing is always that it's lock free. So that means that it's liquid. So that means you can move it at any time. But once you go below that minimum amount, you are no longer eligible to earn rewards. And here's something that I did notice is that even if you're below the minimum amount, you can actually still, because of the random function that's built in, you could actually still get selected to create a block. You just won't get the reward for it. Will actually get what'll happen is the reward will get held in place for the next person that gets the block, and if they're eligible, they'll get it.
Oh, geez. Okay.
I mean, they did it by design because basically what they're trying to do is the economics game of trying to encourage people to hold X amount in place. So in other words, instead of forcing you to hold in place through a locking mechanism, get you to do it yourself through encouragement.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like positive reinforcement.
Yeah. You're in control.
Yes.
Right. Makes sense. Well, I'm all done.
Yeah. So am I.
All right.
This is another good conversation.
Yeah. Let's hopefully we're all healthy now and we can continue on, and guess we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Now, please like, share, comment, and subscribe.